Well, today we finish up our series on the Christmas story. We've looked at Luke's Gospel, we've looked at the announcements, we've looked at the prophecies that led up to Christ's coming, we've looked at the political climate that he was born into, with Rome in power, with Caesar Augustus, with Herod. We've looked at the announcement to Mary, the announcement to Joseph. We looked at the travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem. We've looked at the birth of Christ. We've looked at the announcement by the angels to the shepherds, and then the testimony of the shepherds to the people that were around him. And so today we're going to be finishing up. This is something that's normally connected in with the Christmas story, even though we'll find in a little bit that it's much later on. But so we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 2 today, and sort of looking at this particular story about being salt and light and sowing seeds. You know, you never know how you might be used. You may not see the results, but God's word does not return void, does not return empty. And as we look at this final part of the traditional Christmas story, its roots really go back centuries. So we're going to start by reading the first couple of verses of Matthew chapter 2, and then we're going to look at a few things here as we go into this story. So now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and have come to worship him." So, Matthew's Gospel, in the previous chapter, we saw Joseph receiving the vision from the angel, and he takes Mary as his wife, and did not know her until she had brought forth her firstborn son, and called his name Jesus. In Luke's Gospel, we saw the actual birth, we saw the angels and the shepherds, and then if you continue reading Luke's account, it goes into when Mary's purified, when Jesus is circumcised, dealing with a couple people that come in and give a prophecy for Jesus in the temple. But we have this particular event in chapter 2 where these Magi, or wise men from the east, come to Jerusalem, searching for this new king. And Matthew makes reference that Herod is the king. We did a little bit of that in the second week of December, looking at who Herod is. He eventually would die in 4 BC, so obviously this is before that. And so Jesus was born around 7 or 8 BC, and so this is before Herod dies. And so these wise men have come from the east, and another word for them would be Magi. It's also the word where you get magician from. They're astrologers. But who else do we know in the Old Testament that was a Magi, that was a wise man, that would have connections to him? Well, there was a few people that would sort of have this connection. And that's with the book of Daniel. Because when Israel got kicked out of the land, they took a lot of young people to the land of Babylon. And this is where these wise men are coming from, is from the Middle East, from the area around Iraq, Iran. And so this is where Daniel and his friends, that we normally refer to as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they have different Jewish names. We usually use Daniel, which is his Hebrew name, instead of his Babylonian name, which is Belteshazzar. But we usually refer to him as Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So, who could have taught them? It was probably Daniel. This was about 500 years before the birth of Christ. All right? So, you have Daniel and his 3 friends. Now, there's an event that takes place in the book of Daniel that might have given at least some of the wise men of Babylon sort of a respect for him. So, sort of a background, King Nebuchadnezzar is the king at the time. This is in chapter 1 and 2. He's the king, and he has a dream in chapter 2. And he can't remember what the dream is. And so, he calls in his wise men, his Magi. And in verse 4, starting in verse 3, and the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans, which are the wise men in Babylon, spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. Real nice guy, right? However, if you tell me the dream and its interpretation, then you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till this time has changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore no king, no lord, no ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this reason the king was angry and very furious, and gave a command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. So Nebuchadnezzar basically says, you're not going to pull the wool over my eyes. If you can't tell me what the dream is, you can't give me the interpretation. So obviously you're phonies, is what Nebuchadnezzar is saying to them. You're a bunch of phonies. So Daniel's in the same situation, and his three friends. They're in the situation where they're going to be killed with the rest of the Magi, with the rest of the wise men. And so it goes on, and it talks about that the servant comes to Daniel and tells him about this decree that King Nebuchadnezzar is going to kill them all. And so in verse 15 it says, why is this decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, which is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what their Jewish names are, his companions, that they might seek mercies from God of heaven concerning the secret. So Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And it goes on that God revealed what the dream was and what its interpretation was. And then the rest of chapter 2 goes into that. And then King Nebuchadnezzar gives honor in verse 46 after the interpretation is given, which Daniel specifically says comes from God, that it's not something that he does, it's something that God told him. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrated himself before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering of incense to him. And the king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal the secret. Then the king promoted Daniel, gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned king and set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat at the gate of the king. So after this particular event, not only did he save the necks of all the wise men, but now he is also the head of them. And Daniel is somebody that trusts God. And so for 500 years, the story of how Daniel had protected the wise men and how he was the leader of the wise men has probably been passed down. Now, there's nothing to say definitively that it's Daniel, but there's a good chance, because of his reputation and because of what he did for the wise men, and that the fact that he was over the wise men, the Magi, that his testimony had gone down from generation to generation to generation. Now, who knows what he was talking to them? Maybe he was using some things from the Torah. So over in the book of Numbers, chapter 24, verse 17, we have this particular passage. This is the third book of the Old Testament, third book, or the fourth book of the Pentateuch, book of Numbers, and chapter 24, where we have this prophecy looking forward. So Numbers 24, verse 17, which says, "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and batter the brow of Moab, and destroy all the sons of Tolma." So a star should come out of Jacob. Also, a contemporary of Daniel was Isaiah. In Isaiah, in chapter 60, verse 17, it reads, Indeed of bronze I will bring gold, and instead of iron I will bring silver, and instead of wood, bronze, and instead of stones, iron. I will make your offices peace, and your magistrates righteousness." Let's see. 60 verse 3. I was reading the wrong verse. 60 verse 3. "The Gentiles shall come to your light, and the kings to the brightness of your rising." And so here we have these Gentiles coming from the east, from where modern-day Iran is, and they are coming to find the new king. So these Magi had been saved under the administration of Daniel, and somehow that knowledge has been passed on from generation to generation, about 500 years. And so we have these Magi that come. Now, we sang the hymn, "We Three Kings." There's nothing to say that there was three kings or three wise men. That's a traditional thing. They even have names, Gaspar, Melchior, and Belshazzar. But there's nothing in Scripture that says that there's three. There could have been a minimum of two. There could have been dozens. We don't really know how many they are. But here you have these men coming this long distance, and so they say that we've seen his star while we were in the east, and we've traveled here. Now I looked to sort of give an idea of the path that they would have taken. Now in modern day, they could basically go from here across to Jerusalem, but in biblical times they would have gone north and then they would have come down. So it's about a 1,200 mile trip, which would take about 22 hours by car. And if you're going the other way across, it's about 600 to 700 miles. So this is a long journey. It's a little bit longer than the Nazareth to Bethlehem journey that we saw a few weeks ago. So we saw this star. They come to Jerusalem, because this is the capital, this is where the king would be. This is, if somebody would know, it's going to be in the royal family. It should be somebody, it should be a child of Herod, or, a grandchild. We saw his star. We saw this celestial body, or whatever it is. It could either be a star, a planet, or something else, as we're going to look in just a second. So, this has been a long period of time, as we're going to see a few verses later on. This is at least a year to 2 years after the birth of Christ. We have our nativity scenes, and you have your cards where you have the shepherds and you have the wise men all at the stable with Jesus. That wasn't the case. This is a year or two after the birth of Christ, and so there's a big gap of time in there. So they saw this. They're astrologers. Something clicked with them that said, this isn't a normal event, and the Jewish king has been born. Now, isn't it interesting that the Gentiles, the pagans, recognized the birth of Christ before the people of God, the people that should have known that he was coming? So they said, we saw this, and we took a journey. We took a long journey to get here. Whether they were taught by Daniel and his 3 friends centuries before, something had made an impact on their life, enough that they said, we're going to go search out for him. They were impacted so much, that they gave of their time, their talents, and their treasure to journey, to take this long travel to see this foreign king. If you think about, like how long of a trip this is, and just think about all the obstacles. I mean, you're taking a long trip, and this is 1 to 2 years later, so you're talking about at least half a year journey, at least, of travel. And so you're putting a lot of stuff on hold to prepare whatever caravan, to whatever protections you have because of the gifts you're bringing to this new king. You're going through different territories that are not necessarily controlled by your empire, but are controlled by Rome. So you're going to be taking this long journey. So they're dignitaries. They're very high up, but they took a lot of prep time and a lot of journey time to get there. So they show up into Jerusalem and go to Herod, figuring that this new child is either his kid or his grandkid, and it's not, and they're completely clueless. So they say, we saw the star in the east, and we've come to worship. So they've journeyed west, and they've come to worship the new king. So verse 3, it says, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. Literally, this word means fear and perplexed. Now, Herod, especially by this time, is a little crazy, and he's killed a lot of people. He was kind of a madman. This is toward the end of his life. And so Jerusalem is all kind of upset about this as well, because they know what his response can be, because he's killed some of his own kids and to keep his own throne protected. And so now there's this new child on the scene that he has no idea about, has never been on his radar, and he's kind of upset. He's perplexed. There's fear. There's anger. And so Jerusalem's upset with him, and he's upset. And so verse 4 says, and when he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes and the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ, where the Messiah was to be born. So he brings in the priests. He brings in the scribes, the people that know the word. And they find in Micah, and probably I can just imagine that they're just quoting this. It says, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So here you have these priests and these scribes coming in, and they're quoting from Micah about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. And I can just imagine that. It's like, this is where he's going to be. This is what the scriptures say. It probably didn't even faze them. Here you have their Messiah, and people from outside of Israel are coming in here, and they just want to keep the status quo. They don't really care if the Messiah is there. Like, whatever. This is where he's supposed to be born. He's supposed to be born in Bethlehem. The people that should have been waiting for the Messiah weren't. It was the Gentiles who had to tell them that he had come. The people, the priests and the scribes, knew about the Messiah, but they didn't know him, and they didn't want to know him. Their hearts weren't in the right place. It reminds me of Jeremiah, when Jeremiah is prophesying against them in chapter 2, verse 8, and it says, and the priests did not say, where is the Lord? And the priests did not say, where is the Lord? And those who handle the law do not know me. And the rulers transgressed against me, and the prophets prophesied by Baal and walked after things which do not profit. It didn't move them, it didn't excite them that the Messiah could have been born in Bethlehem. They could care less. They knew where he was supposed to be born, but they had no desire to follow him or to upset the status quo. So verse 7, it goes on and it says, Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them the time that the star appeared. And we'll see from verse 16 that he found that it was about 2 years. So a year to 2 years. So he calls the wise men in and determines, he gets the information of, well, how long was it that you saw the star? How long ago was it that you saw it? And, when did it appear to you? When did you start this journey? He's getting some information. He's getting some intel from them, which he's not going to use in a good way. So he calls them secretly to find out when the star appeared. It's about 2 years. Verse 8 goes on, and he gives them a message, a charge, and he says, And he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. Lie, 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 lie. Go search for him. Go look very carefully. Determine exactly where he is, which house he's at. Get me the information. That way I can come back and I can worship him as well. Yeah, no, that's not his motive. He wants to go worship. Nope, Herod has no interest in worshiping. So verse 9 it says, And when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came, and it stood over where the young child was. So this particular verse is where you start wondering exactly what this is, because the star leads them, which stars, comets, planets really don't move. You don't really see them, especially to the point where they're going to be over top of something. So either Matthew's talking about this as in a symbolic sense, or over in the book of Revelation, and it's possible, it's hard to know exactly, it's the exact same word that's used in the Greek for star, but in Revelation chapter 9, verse 1, it says, And then the fifth angel sounded, and a star, same word as in Matthew's Gospel, and a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given a key to the bottomless pit. How can a star hold a key? Because it's talking about an angel in that context. So, were the wise men actually following an angel? I don't know. Possibly. But it's an interesting thing when you look at verse 9, that it stood over where the young child was. So when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. They're more excited than the people in Jerusalem. They're excited. They're like, we found it. We found the Messiah. We found the King of the Jews. We found him. So they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. It's interesting. It's the Gentiles that got excited about it, not the Jews, the ones that should have been excited about it. So they rejoiced in finding the new king. Verse 11 says, And when they had come into the house, again, it's not a stable. I don't know if it's the same one that we looked at, same kind of house. They might have just moved there for that time. But they came into the house, and they see the young child and Mary, his mother. Joseph's not in the house at this time, obviously. Matthew's not mentioning that he's there. So they saw the young child and Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So they fell down, they prostrated themselves before the king. And they bring gifts. This is where we get the idea of three kings, because there's three gifts, and they figure one per Magi. Who knows how much gold, who knows how much frankincense, who knows how much myrrh they brought. So gold, it's a luxury. All three of these are luxury items. So you have gold, which would represent the the royalty, the king, that this is somebody that's that's of royal birth, and it's the currency. Frankincense is from the resin of trees, and it's used in a high quality incense. Is very, very expensive, and it's used as an incense. It was used in the temple. Exodus chapter 30, verse 34. 30 verse 34 mentions about frankincense being in the tent of meeting of the tabernacle as being one of the incenses. So chapter 30 verse 34 it reads, "And the Lord said to Moses, Take sweet spices, stach, ochran, gallim, and pure frankincense. With these sweet spices there shall be equal amounts of each." And the idea of frankincense was something that was to symbolize deity. So you have the gold, which is symbolizing royalty, the kingship. Frankincense, this particular resin from trees in Arabia, was something that was to be used to symbolize deity. And then you have the third spice. The third is myrrh. And it's from a thorny tree, and it's used from the gum from that you get myrrh from. And I had some essential oils put together. So this, if you want to take these out of the bags and pass them around, this is what myrrh smells like. This is what frankincense smells like. You want to take it out of the bag there, and just be careful not to get them in your eyes. And these are pictures of what frankincense and myrrh look like. So this is what it looks like in its natural form. That's what frankincense and myrrh looks like. So frankincense is very high quality. It represents God and deity. And myrrh is a thorny tree that the natural gum comes from. We see this particular herb, this particular gum in John's Gospel, chapter 19. You also see it in the Old Testament, but in John chapter 19, we have in verse 39, starting actually in verse 38. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, so this is after the death of Jesus. Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and he took the body of Jesus. And Nicodemus, who had first come to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. So myrrh was used for burial. So in the three gifts from the Magi, the three gifts from the wise men, you have the gold symbolizing the kingship or the royalty of Christ. You have the frankincense, which shows his deity, and you have the myrrh, which celebrates his sacrifice on the cross and his death. So in those three gifts, you have his story right there. King, God, and sacrifice, as the hymn goes. So how much was given of these gifts, we don't really know, but we'll see in just a little bit probably what they went for, that they probably didn't have them for very long. So verse 12, it says, "Then being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed to their own country another way." So they went back a different way. They didn't go back through Jerusalem. They went back to the former Babylonian Empire a different way. So they're being warned in a dream as well. And then Joseph is also warned in a dream about something that's about to happen. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, "Arise, take the young child, his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word of Herod, bring you word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt. And they were there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I call my son. So Joseph is warned. So the wise men are warned, saying, go back to your country a different way. And Joseph is warned, saying, Herod is seeking the young child's life. He wants to kill the young child. So take Mary, take the child, and go to Egypt. And I imagine the gold, the frankincense, and myrrh probably were sold or used on that escape to get out of there. And also probably for the time that they spent in Egypt, which could have been a year or two. And then Herod would eventually die in 4 BC. So verse 16, we see Herod's reaction to the Magi not coming back. Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry. And he sent forth to put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all of its districts from 2 years old and under, according to the time which was determined from the wise men. Then it was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. So there we find about 2 years, because he puts to death all children that are 2 years and under. God was protecting Jesus from being killed by the madman Herod, the false king. Now the trip to Egypt could have been anywhere from about 50 to 300 miles, depending on how far into Egypt that they went into. But I can imagine that they used that gold, that frankincense, and myrrh as a way to get away. And it's also possible by this time there wasn't just Jesus, as he had 6 siblings at least. And by the time he came back from Egypt, he probably definitely has some siblings, some half-siblings. So Herod kills children in Bethlehem, and then Herod himself dies soon after. So as we finish 2018, as we enter 2019, remember that the world is watching. The Magi were watching Daniel and his 3 friends, and the seeds, the chicken feed that they had planted centuries earlier, brought a group of wise men to meet the newborn King Jesus. It's also a word of caution for us that just because we might know the word, just like the scribes and the priests knew the word, if we're not applying it to our lives, if I'm not applying it to my life, we might miss what God is doing around us. As the priests and the scribes knew where the Messiah was going to be born, but had no interest in him. That lack of interest would lead them years down the line to crucifying him, because they didn't want to upset their status quo or their power. As each of us enter into 2019, let's be like the wise men and seek after Christ, and be like Daniel and his 3 friends, being a light in a dark world. Things didn't always go Daniel's way. His 3 friends were thrown into the fiery furnace. Daniel, when he was in his 80s, was put into a lion's den. Things didn't go well, but he was still a light in that dark world. And he was planting seeds. So plant seeds in 2019. Spread the gospel and be the gospel. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, for the Magi who gave so much of their time, gave of their treasure, gave of their talents to navigate, to find the Christ, to find the Messiah. Lord, it reminds me of the parable of the Good Shepherd, where you left the 99 to seek after the one. Lord, help us to be like the Magi, to search after you, find your will. Help us not to fall into the trap if we know your word, that we're better than others. Help us to be listening for the still small voice. Help us to be like Daniel and to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who in the dark circumstances of being taken into captivity into Babylon, probably watching their family be slaughtered, and yet they still trusted you. And their testimony made an impact that affected hundreds and thousands of lives over centuries, that eventually would bring Magi from the east to search for Christ. We never know what seeds we're planting. Help us to plant the right ones. Help us to shine the light, and that it won't be a distortion of what Christ has done in our lives. Help us to be salt and light in this world that so desperately needs you, so desperately needs hope. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.